Adam, the idea of decentralized finance has been around for a while now, though it has grown and expanded throughout the years. How has it changed since Bitcoin was first introduced to us back in 2009, and why has DeFi now become such a hot topic?
Yeah, so decentralized finance is the reason why kind of Bitcoin exists. It invented decentralized finance. The first application of decentralized finance was a payment system, which was Bitcoin, effectively. And so, you know, it looks a bit primitive now, but at the time it was a watershed moment to be able to transfer value across borders instantly was a major innovation for the time. But as you know, the technology started to evolve, and you know, new initiatives were developed, including the ability to program on a blockchain. Of course, this notion or meme, if you will, of decentralized finance has become kind of very abundant. And you know, what we see now is not really something that we should be surprised about, because it was everything that Bitcoin, you know, invented, and everything since then has been, if you want, like the Cambrian explosion, a part of the evolutionary process of blockchain technology. So yeah, the space now, of course, is somewhat different to what it was at the very beginning, but since Ethereum launched, there have been many iterations on what can be done on the Ethereum blockchain. Initially, it was very much just about, well, I can use the Ethereum blockchain to raise capital. I can do an initial coin offering by providing a smart contract that people can contribute funds to. And if you look at the original kind of website of Ethereum, in fact, you could see that the central application that they referred to was crowdfunding on a blockchain. But of course, the technology evolved, and there was this notion of composability or money Legos, where initiatives were put together, which those initiatives were solving different problems within the Ethereum ecosystem. So if you can imagine a watch that it has many different cogs, and each of the cogs has a specialist or specialized function. The same is true today with DeFi. That what we are witnessing now is composability on blockchain, multiple applications, if you want, that are connected, and by being connected, they're able to offer a very complete decentralized finance experience. An example of that, for example, may be Yearn Finance, which Yearn Finance, if you want, is nothing more than a money manager, but it is purely decentralized system. But what it leverages are systems such as Compound, which provides the ability to lend or borrow assets and receive incentives for doing so. And other protocols that exist, and even insurance through the likes of Nexus Mutual that can support that initiative. So what we are witnessing now, which is different to what was in the past, is the maturing of the infrastructure of decentralized finance, which allows for this notion of composability, and therefore much greater, much more powerful decentralized finance applications. But DeFi is no invention. DeFi is the genesis of it is Bitcoin, and it just takes time for things to evolve.
With all this history behind it, why do you think there's suddenly been such a huge focus on the area, and why has investment in DeFi suddenly become so popular?
I think the reason why there's such a focus on this area is because of the maturing of the infrastructure in DeFi. When you now you have systems such as mentioned Yearn Finance Synthetics. Synthetics is, if you want, a system where you can place assets and derive value from those assets. These systems, they can interact together. Another one is Aave. Aave is a lending platform. This permits you, to go there and get a loan almost immediately. In fact, to a large extent, they invented the over-collateralized loan system within Ethereum, which is you provide a set amount of crypto to Aave, and they will provide you with a loan because you've provided more than 100% collateral. So when you have a system like that, you can borrow from it. You can then take those assets and place them in other applications. And all of these applications, they kind of intersect and interplay. And by virtue of that, it becomes a full ecosystem. And so why is more investment going into it, whether it's from VCs or others? It's because now, because of this infrastructure that's been built, and that infrastructure was built essentially during the bear market, because of that, you can create extremely powerful applications today. And there is another factor at play here, which is the biggest challenge of decentralized finance was the ability to exchange crypto, which counterintuitively required a centralized party, which was the exchange. And so the likes of Mt. Gox, etc., that emerged in the early times, they emerged because it was the only way of exchanging crypto for fiat, and then later crypto to crypto, and etc. It was the only feasible way of doing it, apart from meeting someone in person to do the transaction. But when the Ethereum ecosystem emerged, and prior to that, there was the notion of a decentralized exchange even prior to Ethereum. Things like Counterparty and some other things, they came up with this notion as well. Ripple, of course, had that notion in their own ecosystem and protocol. But the turning point really was the invention of multiple decentralized exchanges on Ethereum, but realizing that there was no liquidity in that market, that it was very difficult to create a market based on an order book for decentralized exchanges. And if you have an order book and no one's on the other side of the order, then nothing matches, which means no one can execute a trade, and you have to wait a week maybe for your trade to be executed. That is not going to compete with the centralized exchange market. And so the centralized exchange market had for a period of time dominance in that regard. But with the likes of Bancor was one of the first of this new type of decentralized exchanges called automated market makers, that they introduced a new typology, if you will, of ways of swapping tokens, and which is referred to as being the automated market maker. And the biggest, let's say, company doing that was Uniswap. And Uniswap essentially made it possible for anyone to swap any asset on crypto without custody. And it was an amazing invention, and allowed for people to pretty much transact any type of crypto possible. Of course, prior to that, there was the likes of Shapeshift, which was a very user-friendly, decentralized, but somewhat centralized exchange. But with Uniswap, everything operates in the smart contract to that regard. So when you have liquidity in a decentralized market and you have composability, then you have the burgeoning of a sustainable ecosystem for decentralized finance. Liquidity and composability. So the tools that you need to build application, and liquidity so that you don't have to leave that decentralized environment. Those two things are converging at the moment, which makes it a highly investable market, and where you're seeing, if you will, new innovations happening almost weekly in that regard, new projects coming out with new tools, if you will, and also new applications.
So you've mentioned new projects, new applications. There are a number of different areas in which DeFi is particularly noteworthy. which applications do you see as having the greatest impact through DeFi, or which applications are you most excited for?
I mean, for me, the most exciting applications are the ones that, first of all, are run entirely by communities. I find this notion of organizational less operations as being fascinating. You know, the decentralized autonomous organizations, the DAO, so to speak, you know, which, you know, you could argue that Bitcoin is a DAO. It's one of the first decentralized autonomous organizations. People vote with their coins ultimately, or with their hashing power. So, you know, again, this is no new notion. It's just that it's become more feasible to spin out these organizations and to make them more elaborate in terms of what they can and can't do. And also the invention within governance, the amount of thought that's gone into governance of these decentralized systems, like, it is astounding, really. And it's and you can see it working. And that's why I think applications that today are really at the cutting edge are ones that are, you know, pushing the edge of decentralized governance to an extent that, you know, even the operation of the smart contract and changes to the smart contract are not with any one central party, and that it can be organized in a manner that, you know, it's not just on the surface decentralized or the services decentralized, but also the governance of changes within that protocol. So there are a couple of projects. One is Synthetics. It's been around for a very long time, but they've just been gradually moving closer and closer towards decentralized governance. And you know, it's interesting if you see what's happened just recently with the KuCoin hack, which projects can and can't do anything to prevent, if you want those funds to be dispersed. Synthetics, you know, is not really able to do anything at this stage because it doesn't have essentially centralized governance over the protocol. You know, and I saw a tweet the other day from gentleman, security token guy. He said, if you can freeze your smart contract, then you're a security. Essentially, if you can freeze your smart contract, then you're centralized. Yeah, so I think applications that are really on the cutting edge of decentralizing governance is probably one of the most exciting areas. Now, are they offering a useful service? That's of course another question. But if you look at, I think the prime example of that is Yearn Finance. Really, when you look at the grassroots nature of that project, where a person that comes with an idea of how we can do money management, essentially, in DeFi, and how we can allow anyone to benefit and you know, participate in money management. He just made that possible. He just invented it, put out some smart contracts, and said, you know, I don't want to do this by myself. And say, well, if you want to contribute, you can. And if you do contribute and participate, then you will earn tokens. And then the tokens become part of the governance, etc. And he himself, who, you know, his name's Andre Conje, he, you know, stepped away from the force, so to speak, and is not really in control of the helm of the Yearn Finance ship anymore. But he is still a major inventor and contributor to the project. I mean, to me, that is a major innovation of human kind, and the ability to create something that has become self-sustaining even without the person that created it. So yeah, I think a few projects of that nature to me really do, that really does take my interest. Other projects, of course, like that are indispensable to this ecosystem working is things like decentralized insurance, like with Nexus Mutual, for instance. Then, like, I really do feel that there are some projects that we should never forget about that really push the boat out, and that was MakerDAO. MakerDAO, you know, to a large extent, you know, in 2017 was one of the first that really came up with an incredible thing to do with Ether. which is to collateralize it and to create a stable coin that's not reliant upon any external third party. We should also remember that this, again, is not some new invention. BitShares came up with this back in 2014. But MakerDAO succeeded in doing it on Ethereum, and it's been one of the most interesting projects to follow and fundamental component of this DeFi ecosystem. So there are newer projects that are more on the cutting edge of decentralized governance that I find very exciting. But there are also projects that are kind of fundamental to keeping this thing ticking. And yeah, they're doing a fantastic job in that regard.
That's a lot of companies to look out for and keep an eye on, and a lot of ones that have already impacted the space. With such a wide array of opportunities, how do you see DeFi impacting the identity management ecosystem and Blockpass in particular?
Yeah, my point of view on this is that DeFi is a kind of self-sustaining ecosystem. There are within DeFi, let's say that it depends upon itself, and the more it can depend upon itself, the less it needs to rely on any external source of information. However, that being said, a lot of these DeFi projects rely on services such as Chainlink. Chainlink is an oracle that provides external price data in smart contracts, because you can't push data into smart contracts directly. You need to have an oracle service to be able to do that. So even though these systems are supposed to be insular and self-sustaining, they still rely upon external sources of data. And I could imagine, in a few years' time down the line, that identity oracles may be required to perform a similar service. But I don't think this is in relation to KYC or AML necessarily. But I think it's more in relation to duplication of accounts. So the problem about pseudonymous crypto is that you don't know if 100,000 addresses that have interacted with your smart contract are from 100,000 people or from one person. So anyone can Sybil attack you and create 1 million addresses, and all of them can originate from one person. That's a problem because the DeFi ecosystem is somewhat designed to be egalitarian in terms of participation. And a Sybil attack that allows anyone to create a maximum amount of accounts and, take over essentially the smart contract doesn't really fit within that ethos. And so I can see that in the future, people are going to be looking for, let's say, a system that can prove that an account is not a duplicate, and that is a unique address associated with a unique identity, and that person has not created any other additional accounts. That's not to say that that person is revealing their identity, but that within the DeFi ecosystem, they have proven that they have a single address that they're using to interact with the smart contract. I can definitely see that as being something of use. That's kind of innovation within DeFi, but then of course, on the flip side, you've got to get people into DeFi, you've got to get people onto the blockchain, that gateway, so to speak, which is really the role of Blockpass. Blockpass is, it is your pass into the blockchain. It's that simple. There's no, not more complex than that. If you want to get into blockchain, you need an identity. You need a payment onboarding scheme. You need a way of getting crypto. And I think for now, people are not thinking about, I need Bitcoin to participate. I need stable coins rather to participate. So, we are trying to devise the gateway since the very beginning of this project to get people compliantly and safely into decentralized finance, whether that's on Ethereum or on other chains. We've cooperated with other platforms, including Waves and some others. We're speaking to Polymath about how we can enable that gateway from people in the real world to people on the blockchain, and to do that compliantly and safely.
So a lot of opportunities through DeFi, also a few potential issues which maybe Blockpass can help with. But with the recent boom in DeFi investment, many people are comparing it to the ICO craze and other similar events in blockchain history. Do you think that comparison is valid? And do you think DeFi will undergo a similar experience to ICOs? Will regulation slow or halt its growth? Can the ecosystem sustain legitimate growth in the area?
Yeah, I think that the fundamental difference between an ICO and these DeFi projects is that in DeFi the product is already there. So with an ICO, you put money into a smart contract, and you'd have to wait and wait and wait and wait. Maybe you'd get a token, maybe you wouldn't. Maybe you have to wait for the token. Maybe it wasn't the final product, but then eventually there would be this announcement that the product is kind of ready for launch and stuff like that. So it's a lot of waiting around for ICOs. Whereas with DeFi, the product is already there, and your participation is what creates the token from that particular project. So there's no waiting around, and it's the waiting around that creates the issues in the ICO market. So having people, of course, scamming other people. It was obviously, it's more feasible to operate a scam when you're doing an ICO, because at the end you don't have to deliver anything and just run off to the sunset. But with DeFi, it's very easy to discover a scam. So some of the ones like SushiSwap, where you had an anonymous founder, they forked the Uniswap code, and then afterwards, like a week later or so, he dumped all of his dev pool coins and collected the ETH. Picked up a few $1 million. Subsequently felt guilty about it and returned the money, but that these types of scam events are detected almost immediately. And when they're detected, it's kind of community justice in a way. People get on forums, and then eventually that person may return the funds or may not, but it's detected almost immediately. So it's very difficult to operate a scam in DeFi. But then again, there is also a divide between those that understand and those that don't. So because of that difference between levels of knowledge, people may become aware that they have been duped much later, because of the complexity of some of these products that they're interacting with. And some of these products are really not suitable for people that until they understand them. And to understand them, you really need to go into the intricacies of it. So from an investor compliance standpoint, you would be questioning the suitability of certain products for certain people. But in the DeFi space, it's all about invention and reinvention and kind of creative destruction. As people create more projects actually, in fact, are destroyed, and people move on and create more. But you're also seeing kind of in this recycling process, a lot of carbon copy projects. It's like, this person's done Uniswap. Okay, I'll create a carbon copy of it, and the only difference between that and the other is that I'm going to be giving you more tokens initially, which this copycat symptom is the same type of symptom that we've seen within ICOs, where basically just people copying each other and doing ICOs and not really thinking or originating or pushing this space forwards. So yeah, of course you're going to see a lot of that, but in terms of implosion, like the ICOs did, I don't think we're going to see the same type of implosion, because, as I said, DeFi products, they already are there, they already function, etc. Like, they may have somewhat unaudited code or whatever, but they function. The product is already live. You're not waiting. You're not investing and waiting. And investing and waiting creates anticipation, creates the risk of fraud, and other factors. And because you have community monitoring in DeFi, scams are easily detected. So I think it's a very different situation. But then the risks are in this situation surrounding the complexity of the products and the difference in appreciation and knowledge of people participating. That's the tricky part, you know. And I think people are, of course, maybe too reliant on following others. But I think, you know, people will learn from their mistakes as long as they don't have too costly mistakes in that regard. Another factor that comes into play is the cost of interacting with DeFi. People are complaining about high Ethereum gas fees. So it costs you money to do anything on DeFi. So to a large extent, because of that cost, it's a consideration or a barrier for entry. And because of that barrier for entry, you have to do your homework a little bit more before you're willing to do something. So I'm not saying that that's necessarily intended by gas fees, but I think it does give people a second thought about where they're going to throw their money about.
That's a really informative explanation about the difference between ICOs and this recent DeFi investment boom. You mentioned how important education and understanding in this space is. Obviously, this is a very big area that we couldn't hope to cover all in one interview. Where would you suggest that people who are listening to this go to find out more about DeFi and its impact?
Well, I think that there are many great resources already on the internet. There are a lot of different YouTube channels that explain about DeFi and that try to give like almost illustrations about what DeFi is and what, you know, how these different schemes operate. And then there are some podcasts, of course, that are pretty good to follow around the sector on DeFi. And Twitter as well. Twitter is, you know, you can follow a few people in DeFi and then take it from there to develop your knowledge base. Of course, you know, Twitter is one of those things where you're not necessarily getting the full story. You're just getting kind of the stream of consciousness of people involved in DeFi. And there's also our partner Holdex that has, if you want, a lot of content around DeFi as well, which is interesting. But I think, you know, in starting out in this arena, I would be looking a little bit on YouTube, maybe a podcast, and also following a few people on Twitter, just to get a feel for the area. You can follow me on Crypto Regtech, and of course Blockpass as well for any other information.
Thanks for sitting down to talk with us about the intricacies and developments in DeFi, Adam. And I've learned a lot from listening to what you were discussing, and I hope the listeners have too. Looking forward, hopefully we can do this together, another thing like this sometime. Maybe people can email in, send us messages on social media to say what they'd like to hear about next time.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks.